And I think we will start. So good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Rieger, and I am the Chief Executive of the Board of Deputies. And one of my passions, apart from the Jewish people, the Jewish community, and the work that I do, is literature. And of course, anyone who loves reading, particularly English literature, is going to have a slight obsession with Shakespeare. And so it is a phenomenal privilege to be able to combine all my worlds and to welcome to the board's BODcast today, Tracy-Ann Oberman, who I'd like to bring onto the screen. Good evening, Tracy-Ann.
Hi, good to see you.
So I think you're pretty well known. So most people who are joining us this evening, an actor, very well known for shows such as EastEnders, Friday Night Dinners, Ridley Road, a very strong background in Shakespearean acting as well, which I'm sure we will get to. And also over the last few years, especially been a fantastic advocate for the Jewish community. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then I'm going to invite people also to submit questions on the chat, which will go through to my colleague, Daniel Sugarman, and Daniel will forward those on to me. And so I'll try and be brief. I'm sure, Tracy-Ann, you do not have to be brief. You can answer as full or not as you'd like, and we'll go away. So I think people know the concept for this is the production that you've really put together of Merchant of Venice, called Merchant of Venice 36, and set in the context of what's happening in the UK in that era with Mosley, etc. How did that idea come to you? And it feels a little bit like it's a dream that became a reality. So why don't you sort of briefly start? How did you get there?
So The Merchant, I really don't like The Merchant of Venice as a play. I love Shakespeare, but I've always found it a very difficult play. I hated learning it at school back in the Jurassic age. It was taught very badly. Being one of the few Jewish kids in the school, I think I was made to play Shylock. I have memories of in the break time, kids running around going, "My duck, it's my daughter." We've got two archetypes in this country in England of Jewish characters, one of which is Fagin in Dickens, and the most long-lasting is Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. And I always was very interested in the relationship between Shylock and his daughter Jessica, the idea of a very obsessive relationship of a single parent. And so for many years I've wondered what would happen if you turn Shylock into a woman. Sorry, I've got a terrible cold, so if I sound a bit bunged up, that's why. Shylock into a woman, and what that did to that relationship. I then went to see, also the thing with The Merchant of Venice, I've seen productions where Shylock has been an out-and-out villain and also been an out-and-out victim, where they've changed the text or they've changed it so that Shylock is a pure victim to the story. And I don't know which is worse. So I went to see an all-female version of Julius Caesar at the Donmar, and it really worked for me and it really unlocked the play. So it made me think that there is something in this idea of a gender swap. And I met Bridget Larmore, the director, at the Tonic Awards, which is a female award ceremony for women in the arts. And I was telling her about this idea that I'd had, and then she and I discussed it further. And I said I wanted to take Shylock and sort of base it on the matriarchs like my Bubba Annie and my great aunt Machine Gun Molly and my other great aunt Sarah Portugal in the East End of London. Sarah Portugal smoked a pipe, wore a slash of red lipstick. These were strong, tough matriarchs who'd come out of the pogroms of Belarus and the Pale of Settlements, had come to England, as my Bubba called it, the Golden Medina, because nobody wanted to chop your head off or rape you, and there were no Cossacks. And then in 1936, in the slums in Cable Street and the Watling Street Market, they came face to face with Oswald Mosley and his black shirts and the fascist hordes who marched on Cable Street against the Jew. And that was my background of how I wanted to put this production of The Merchant of Venice together.
So before I come on to your production itself, I'd like to go a little bit academic with you for a second. And it did relate to something you said just a couple of minutes ago. So of course, I think many of us will be familiar with productions that have done exactly as you said, have tried to make Shylock sympathetic. But when you go to the core text itself, or as authentic a version of the text as we can find, do you agree with academics who say that it can be read as a sympathetic portrayal?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm assuming everybody on this podcast who are listening, and people from around the world who are listening, know the story of The Merchant of Venice. It's about a Jewish moneylender, Shylock, who lives in the Venetian ghetto, who lends 3,000 ducats to the aristocratic Jew hater Antonio so that his dear best friend Bassanio can have some money to go and woo an aristocrat called Portia. And in order to, whether it's a jokey contract or not, Shylock says, you know what, I'm not going to charge you interest or usury because you hate me for it. But I tell you what, as a joke, or the contract we're going to have is that if you can't pay me, and Antonio laughs and says, well, of course I can pay you. Shylock says, you're going to give me a pound of your fair flesh. And we go off into the sunset, assuming that Antonio is going to pay the money back, and he doesn't pay the money back. And Shylock's life is turned upside down, and the only thing that Shylock has is this contract. And so they end up in court with Shylock demanding that pound of flesh, and is ultimately destroyed through it. So yes, your question, academically, is it possible to you know, the genius of Shakespeare as a writer, and what makes him a classic writer, is that you can take his texts and you can stay with the language, but you can turn them into any time or concept that you want, because ultimately there's a truism of human nature, and the storytelling is so strong that you don't need to set, for example, this play in Venice in the 1500s. You can set it in England in 1936. But the characters still stay the same. For me, he was such a great playwright that, unlike Marlowe, equally good, but we have to remember that, particularly with The Merchant of Venice, this was written 200 years after every Jew had been kicked out of England very violently and very horribly. So Shakespeare, there's a big question about whether he'd even met a Jew. How many Jews were there even living in England, particularly practicing Jews? There was also a great tradition, and I think it was St. Augustine's Day, which was still, even though there were no Jews in England, was still the Jew-hating day of England, where you were, you know, basically kicking an effigy of a Jew around, and you expected your Jew to be the villain or the victim of violence, because that's what they deserved. At the time when Shakespeare wrote this, it was a year or two after Marlowe had written The Jew of Malta. The Jew of Malta is your typical Jewish villainous character, almost cartoon-like, with the big hook nose and the red hair. That was how you knew a character was Jewish. And Marlowe had written a cartoon Jew, a funny, vicious, evil, but incredibly charismatic Jewish character who ultimately is put on a bonfire at the end and goes up in flames. Shakespeare knew that his audience, he was a popularist writer, he wanted, you know, he knew how to please his audience. If you're going to put a Jew on stage, ultimately that Jew has to be pretty villainous and ultimately has to be punished. But where he's such a good writer and such a, you know, took a different way of creating a Jewish character than Marlowe, is that he was able to write the famous speech, "Hath not a Jew eyes?" A plea for humanity, of saying, I'm as human as you are, a plea for tolerance. And while you may not like Shylock in the play, he's still written with the wittiest lines. He's still really fully rounded. And in fact, I'm going to call Shylock she, because I can only think of Shylock as a she.
Sure.
She's still the one who, she's not in, you know, she's not the biggest character, but Shylock is absolutely the leading character of that play. And while at the end, the audience will be happy and go home because that character is routinely, you know, humiliated and punished, and everything is taken away from her, including her religion. You still hope, you know, if you look at just the text, the Christian characters are as dislikable in many ways as his Jewish character by the end. However, it was Hitler's favorite play. Goebbels did a cracking adaptation of it where he hath not a Jew eyes. And there was they did some research in Scandinavia, one of the Scandinavian countries, where audiences said they came out of The Merchant of Venice 78% more anti-Semitic than when they went in. So I don't know if that has answered your question.
No, done very, very well. So you obviously took a fantastic piece of chutzpah in playing Shylock as a woman. You know, that's just absolutely marvelous. I want to ask you a question that I'm not going to require you to answer, but it's your thinking that interests me more, which is, I mean, I know the answer about the liberty that you took with the play and the text, which is marvelous. What was your thinking? Share from there whatever you feel comfortable sharing. What was your thinking when it came to taking liberty with changing parts of the text?
Well, have you seen the production?
I have not seen the production yet. I'm going to, but I have read extensively about it.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you why. Because actually, other than cutting a lot of the, this play runs normally at 3 3/4 hours. We've taken it, we've cut a lot of the extraneous fat off it, a lot of the extraneous characters of it, and we've taken it down to 2 hours with an interval, which is pretty amazing. And it's really, it's speedy, it's quick, it's sexy, it's political, it's punchy, but we haven't altered the text. Changed pronouns from she to he. Instead of Shylock saying you spit on, you pulled my beard, you spat on my beard. Here it's you spat on my hair. Very little had to change. So the chutzpah, I didn't just go into this and go, right, this is it, we're doing it. I worked with Bridget, we workshopped it a number of times just to see if the concept worked to start off with. And then the RSC were fantastic and helped us have another further week to explore it. So we did a lot of exploration on the text and the concept. And I can genuinely say, and as Ray Coulthard, who plays our Antonio, who's done a lot of work with the RSC, he said, as we all found, it was one of the few examples of gender swapping a character in Shakespeare that changes nothing. It's like it could have always been. And that has been the most interesting thing. But what it's done for me, I think, for audiences, because we've already done it in Watford Palace Theatre and in Manchester, and now we're going on this big 10-week national tour. What we learned through, you never know when you do a play what you've made. It's like baking a cake. It's like you can do it in the rehearsal room and you add in all the ingredients and then you do it on the first preview in front of an audience and they tell you what cake you've made. Is it a trifle? Is it a sponge? Is it a comedy? It's always so interesting when you bring that fourth wall and put in the audience and the extra character, the audience tell you what you've made. And what we realized that we'd made was a very powerful, very engaging piece of theatre that had people interacting and wanting to talk. And we had people shouting out during the court case or crying. Lots of people were crying at the end of Act 1. Similarly, the end of Act 2. I'll talk to you about the concept of Cable Street, which is another big factor of it. But we also had people wanting to stay in the auditorium to talk about the play. But by changing Shylock into a woman, and my experience of standing up to anti-Semitism as a woman is that anti-Semitism and misogyny go hand in hand. And where people have turned around and said, well, is it an anti-Semitic play? Is it though? When you see a female Shylock standing up to church and state and authority, and you put her in that court case, this little, lower class woman who's only got this contract to hold on to, and her daughter's left her and converted and everything's been taken away from her. She's got this contract and it's the only thing that she's got. And you have an entire male courtroom turn on her, including Portia, who's dressed as a man. And not only do they say, no, you're not going to have that pound of flesh, but we're going to punish you beyond all punishments. It's such a visceral scene. You can hear a pin drop every single night because it's horrible to see this woman being got at by all these men. It changes it. So there was no chutzpah involved, it turned out, because we didn't change the play. And I think the other thing is people always assumed if I was playing it that I was going to make her a very a victim Shylock, a female victim. I so wanted to honor the text and honor the character Shakespeare had written. And Shakespeare hasn't written a victim. He's written a chutzpahdik, mouthy, funny, witty, charming, mercurial, strong, angry persecuted woman who has survived so much anti-Semitism and has had to be so strong for her single daughter, is a widow. And so hopefully, while you may not like my Shylock, you understand why she is like she is.
I can strongly recommend people to take a quick look at or a slow look at the website that you produced about the production, which is absolutely magnificent. I spent a lot of time on it preparing for our conversation now, but it was genuinely brilliantly done. And I would certainly push people to, when we send out the link for this podcast, we'll include a link to the website. People can look at it. It's really terrific.
You know, it's interesting. I'm so glad you mentioned it because, you know, I've done a lot of television. I've done a lot of theatre. I've done, you know, I've had a long and exciting and very varied career. But for me, this was a legacy piece because I think people are talking about, you know, should you take Shakespeare out of the canon? Should you take The Merchant of Venice out of the canon? Should it even be performed? How should it be performed? You know, we had a lot of teachers coming in saying, oh, it's very triggering for our students. No, absolutely. Teach and show this play, but teach it properly and explain it properly in the context of anti-Semitism and othering. And so we worked very strongly with Stand Up to Racism. We went into a lot of schools that had big problems with anti-Semitism because a lot of people don't understand anti-Semitism.
Sure.
They understand racism, but they don't understand anti-Semitism. And in fact, I don't even like the word anti-Semitism. Just call it, you know, what a Jew hatred.
Jew hatred, yeah.
But what I loved was that when I went in to talk to these kids, and these kids would often, these schools from all the way from sort of year, you know, 9 up to A levels, we did a lot of talks, and I did a lot of workshops with them afterwards, and Stand Up did a lot of workshops. And it, you know, the way in there was to say, have you got a strong mother, a strong grandmother, a strong auntie, a strong sister? These are big immigrant families, a lot of Somalian, a lot of Afro-Caribbean, you know, a lot of Muslim families. Yes, 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 right. Take the word Jew out of this play and imagine it's your auntie or mother, because these battles are fought at home. And imagine, you know, my story is my family came from Belarus, fleeing pogroms, ended up in the East End. Your families ended up in the East End. Our stories may be slightly different, but there's so much that binds us together. And they really got that. And we did a lot of work about how you then talk about Jews in the same way as you would talk about any other minority, and understanding that we are allies against a greater evil, which is either far right or far left fascism.
Absolutely. I want to focus for a second on this word legacy that you use. I'm going to come back to the play in a minute, but I'd love for you to talk for a couple of minutes about how you see the legacy of the mid-1930s UK, Mosley and Ridley Road and the fascists, East End, Cable Street. How do you think that's remembered today, both by the Jewish community and also by wider British society? What's its place?
Well, I'm loving this interview, by the way. We're asking all the questions that I'm so excited about answering because so much thought had gone into it. My daughter from year 5 learnt everything about the American civil rights movement in America, and absolutely quite rightly. But, you know, they were taught very early on, and it went all the way through to years 9 and 10, talking about, she can tell you everything about Alabama, Manchester, the riots, every single thing about the civil rights movement in America. And that's a fantastic thing to learn. We have a civil rights moment in this country which happened at the Battle of Cable Street, that people have completely forgotten about. And the other thing that myself and Bridget felt very strongly about this production and its legacy and Cable Street and Mosley is that we're living at a time where we're looking at British history differently. We're looking at the effects of colonization. We're having statues pulled down. We're looking at links of slavery. We're looking at our history in a critical way. And one of the things that has always surprised me is that we tend to gloss over the British flirtation with fascism that is, you know, that rises very, very often, and also the British flirtation with anti-Semitism. the production that I did at the Royal Court last year, this Jews in Their Own Words, I was shocked that so much about blood libel and Jewish tropes about Jews and money and Jews and blood and Jews and money lending and killing Jewish children, non-Jewish children to bake into matzahs, and all of those tropes came out of English medieval anti-Jewish hatred because we were the king's debt collectors. That was all we were really allowed to do. And then you filter that through to Oswald Mosley and 1930s anti-Semitism. And the other thing that shocked me that we never discuss is that when Oswald Mosley married Diana Mitford, one of the glorious Mitford sisters, they got married at Goebbels' house with Hitler as a witness. And Hitler, and people tend to forget all of this because everybody loves a Mitford. I mean, in my observation, there wasn't a dictator that those sisters didn't like, but there we go. I see, and there's a whole TV series, I think, coming out quite soon about the glorious, quirky Mitfords, two of whom were full-on Hitlerite fascists. We forget this, and we forget that when Mosley was given the playbook of anti-Semitism, of whipping up working-class hatred towards Jews, he went around the country to, as the anti-Semitism star, John Mann, Lord Mann, has been incredibly helpful on this project. He went up to Holbeck Moor in Leeds. He went to Manchester. He went anywhere where there was a working-class Jewish community, tried to whip up hatred. And then when it came to Cable Street, he realized that a lot of ordinary heroes came out and beat the crap out of them. He managed to get the full mounted police to protect him. He had the Daily Mail behind him. He had a lot of aristocratic supporters, but they went down into Cable Street where my Bubba and my uncle, great Uncle Alf, and all of my family were. And 2 weeks before the march on the Jew at Cable Street, they plastered pictures and posters about the international Jew, the money-grabbing Jew, the untrustworthy Jew. They went into Watling Street Market, where my Bubba market stall was, and they were telling them, you know why the Jews have got the better stalls here, don't you? It's because they've bribed the manager. Or you know why the Jews have got the lower floor flats in the slum tenements, and you're on the top floor, Irish working class families, because the Jews it's all about the Jews bribing and getting something, and your life would be so much better. We're going to show the Jews. And on that march, on the four corners, the big, very strong, I mean, I've been looking at this footage all day because we use a lot of this footage in the play. On that march, on the Jew, against the Jew, to show the Jew that it wasn't welcome, at Cable Street, thousands and thousands of them with the full protection of the police. They fully expected to turn up to find all the other working class communities with them. But instead, I was always told by my Bubba, the dockers, the unionists, the trade unionists, the Irish working class neighbour, the small Afro-Caribbean community, the ordinary English working classes, basically said, if you come for the Jew, you come for us all, and we're standing together. And they did stand together, and they linked arms, and they turned over the milk floats, and they threw marbles from the window, and they said, you come for one, you come for all. And they turned them away. And that, to me, is the quintessential civil rights moment that we have forgotten about, which is where Jews and their allies stood together to say, we are one, you are not welcome here, you shall not pass. And that is what I think we have forgotten. And that's the legacy of what I want to remind people through this play.
Yeah, and for anyone who hasn't understood until now, I think now the penny will have dropped. So that's why people should go and see this production of the play, because of that point that you argued so eloquently here, and I'm so looking forward to seeing it in the play itself. I'm going to come back to shut. I'll let you go first.
I mean, the other dream that I've got is that to take this into other countries as well, because anti-Semitism and fascism was prevalent in America, in Canada, in Australia, all over the Allied countries. There was a big rise in acceptable anti-Semitism and fascism. And I would love to take this to the Bowery in New York. I would love to take this to Canada, just to remind them a bit of their own history.
So I pledge to you that we will make sure that we send this to all of our contacts that the board has around the world. So we'll give you a chance to see this short interview and hopefully inspire them. I'm going to stay with America for a little bit, and it's going to bring us back to your wonderful interpretation of Shylock. Last year saw the publication of a tremendous book by American Dara Horn, I don't know whether you've come across it yet, but it's called "People Love Dead Jews," and, and, and it's a superb book, and I can highly, highly recommend it to anybody on the podcast. And she makes the point that people are a lot more comfortable with dead Jews than they are with live ones, but actually thinking about the living, breathing, argumentative, functioning Jewish community it's got its richness, its diversity, all its complexity, and that's much harder often for a non-Jewish society to handle. Now, she brings that argument to think about Shylock's speech that you mentioned before, "Have not a Jew eyes." And she said, you could read it not as as the defense of an innocent man, but actually as the whining plead of a victim saying, "Don't blame me, I was treated this way, that's why I'm bad and I'm evil." And she has a very, very unusual take on it, and it was inspired by her son, who, in studying the play at school, I've got a quote here. He says, "This is the classic sort of thing that a villain says to try and justify their behavior. I've had a rough life, and if you were me, you would do the same." So she argues in the book that the speech is another affirmation of the anti-Semitism rather than a defense. So I know it's quite provocative, but it's a terrific book, and I wonder what your thought is on it.
Yeah, number one, People Love Dead Jews is hilarious, because one of the things I'm an actor first and foremost, but one of the, I have many writing and producing and actor and friends who are Jewish in this industry. It's all about the narrative and the stories, and the Jewish characters and the archetypes that we often see are Holocaust, Fiddler on the Roof, pogroms, the Holocaust. So that those are, people are comfortable with seeing their Jewish characters and can accept them, often played by non-Jews, in those situations of being victims. And I think we need to start telling different stories with Jewish characters. I think we can have Jewish characters who are in a story, but it isn't about their Judaism. It's held and worn very lightly. But also there's a whole host in this country of other Jewish stories that I've never seen told, of ordinary Jewish people just living their lives. In fact, that's something I'm trying to do on a TV side of things, is trying to tell more stories of our experience that isn't dead Jews. So that's the first thing. I think we have to change people's perceptions about, I'm very friendly with people like Mira Sayal and Sanjeev Bhaskar. And as Mira always says, for a long time, people wanted to see their Indian women, in oppressive marriages. You had a certain narrative that was allowed to be told. And I think that through Goodness Gracious Me and so much of what they did, they spread the boundaries as to how we see Asian heritage or Middle Eastern heritage characters as well. And similarly, I think with Black stories, and I think we're seeing different narratives. And I think it's time we start seeing there's lots of different Jewish stories and lots of different Jewish characters that we can explore. When it comes to "Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands, organs, senses, dimensions," I think her son is not a Shakespeare scholar, and I don't know how old her son is, but they clearly don't understand the Shakespeare. I mean, with the best will in the world, you can't see that as a whining Jew pleading for humanity. You got to go back to the words and the context of when the words are written. It's actually a brilliant speech, because it clearly is a brilliant speech, because Goebbels took it out of his adaptation of The Merchant of Venice. He couldn't see anything about the whining Jew in it. He saw it as a plea for humanity to say, we are the same. You've othered me, but I've got hands and organs and senses and dimensions, affections and passions. We eat the same food. We're hurt with the same weapons. We're poisoned. We're healed by the same doctor. We're warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. And if you prick me, I bleed just like you do. And if you tickle me, I laugh just like you do. But if I'm like you, and you taught me that if I wrong you, my punishment is revenge. But if you wrong me, then my punishment also has to be revenge, because you've taught me that. I can't see any whining Jewiness in that at all. It's just really clear It's a brilliant speech, and it's been used by anti-racists since the play was written.
I'm going to encourage you and others to read the book anyway, and perhaps I didn't give her as fair enough chance of it, but that's fine. I'm conscious we've spoken a lot about what it means for you to have played Shylock as a Jewish woman. I think we've focused quite a lot on the Jewish side of that. Would you mind focusing for a second on the woman side of that? About a woman playing a key Shakespearean role. I think that's equally important and interesting for us to think about.
Definitely. I think it's oh gosh, a journalist came to see it very early on, I think in one of the previews, I think it was for Front Row, and we talked about it, and she said it was so unusual to see female rage on stage. Nobody goes into, this is so not a vanity project, because I don't think many actresses would wake up and go, the character I've always wanted to play is Shylock. But I wanted to play Shylock because I wanted, she's a complicated woman. It's a complicated part. It's to go into a part that has control and has anger and has fury and has revenge, and some would say bitterness running through her. The fact that she demands a pound of a man's flesh, that she's prepared to hold a knife, whether she's prepared to take it or not. The fact that she's strong enough to be able to go into a court case, and we've got this big Union Jack that sort of hangs down, and she takes on church and state, is able to listen. She's a working class character, and I don't know whether Shakespeare saw Shylock as an educated man. I don't think it was necessarily written as that. It's been subsequently played as such. But by playing her as a working class woman who has the chutzpah, it's going back to the Jewishness again, I can't help it. But but who has the balls, the chutzpah, the natural survival instinct to turn around and go, no, I'm taking this on. I will not be intimidated. And to be able to feel as an actor in a part, as an actress in a part where you feel everybody is getting at you and you've got to dredge up this inner strength, that was very exciting. And also not to be liked. I've always maintained, I noticed with people that didn't like, a lot of Jewish activists like myself, or Rachel Riley or Luciana Berger, the women that stood up to talk about anti-Semitism, the people that fought them, who often were, I think were misogynist, because you certainly didn't see them attacking the men in the same way. But the belief that, women, and particularly actresses, want to be liked, and if they're not liked, then somehow that's going to destroy them. That's the great thing about playing a character that doesn't care whether she's liked. She just wants justice. Justice is everything.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up. I've got quite a lot of questions that have come in from people here, which will be lovely. So this thing about non-Jews playing Jewish characters, which has been probably since David Baddiel's book a couple of years ago, it's been a very, very big topic that has really, I think, caught the imagination of people to think about. And so I'm wondering how you understood Baddiel's argument that it's only Jews who are, in a sense, accused of being oversensitive when non-Jews play them, whereas no one would think about casting a non-Black person in a Black role, etc., etc. And I'm just wondering how that argument has played out in your circles and in your mind over the last few years.
So before David wrote Jews Don't Count, Sarah Silverman, who's a brilliant comedian and actress in America, said it's fascinating that they're making a film or TV series about a Jewish female comedian based on Joan Rivers, but there's no Jewish comedian that they can play her. And she said, as a Jewish attractive actress, I am only ever cast as the third lead, the Heine best friend, the Moni daughter, and all the other negative archetypes and stereotypes that go with Jewish characters. But that when it comes to casting Jewish women, they want their non-Jewish women, to play them, because by Aryanizing them, they're more attractive to look at. And she had already brought that up, and a lot of people had been talking about it.
This is people haven't seen it. This is the marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Part in the marvelous Maisel, and then there was another thing about Joan Rivers that.
Sorry, right.
But she had a point. She absolutely has a point. How do I feel about this? It's ultimately I trained as an actor. When you're as an actress, I'm reclaiming that word. We are trained. The whole point of acting is to play other people, is to be able to use your training, your skill, your imagination, your ability to create a character, a living, breathing character from words on a page. And you should be able to play anything. That goes without saying. But we're living in times that is very sensitive towards cultural appropriation of other minorities. I did a series called It's a Sin that Russell T. Davies wrote, which was about the AIDS. It was a brilliant series. It touched a lot of people over COVID. It's a fantastic piece of work. But Russell absolutely maintains that when he writes LGBT gay characters, he wants them played by gay actors, because he said, I don't want anybody playing gay or homosexual, lesbian, trans. I want them to have experienced it. There's a shorthand. And for him, the authenticity of having real actors that have lived those experiences brings a shorthand to the production. I've been in many productions about Jewish, centered around Jewish characters, where I've often been the only Jew. And there's been many a time, and I've had friends who maybe were the only Jews. And when they've pointed out problems in authenticity or things that weren't quite right, we're often told, oh, we haven't got time to deal with that, or, oh, it will be fine. And then you do start thinking, would you do that with any other minority? For me, I think there has to be the same sensitivity and discussion around casting as there would for any other representation or minority. David calls us Schrodinger's Jews. We are passing, so anybody can play it. But I think that there has to be a sensitivity and an understanding. And I suppose in an ideal world, I'm loath to say this because, I've played Catholic nuns and I've played, South Africans. I've played lots of different people. But I want to feel that the same respect and debate and sensitivity goes around the casting of Jewish characters, and that if somebody non-Jewish plays somebody Jewish, it's not just a coat that you shrug on. It's not just a character, or it's not a whole load of affectations. That there's a real rooted research and understanding.
I think I'm going to have to ask for the next question, because if I don't ask you, I'm going to get lots of complaints from people. But about the whole thing about people, prosthetic noses and makeup and the whole Jew face thing, which links perhaps to the previous question. So with the Leonard Bernstein biopic just now.
I mean, I wrote quite extensively about that.
Yeah.
The shocker for me was that apparently the film's marvelous, apparently he's brilliant, and apparently the nose doesn't look too bad. However, who allowed those stills from that show go out looking it was whatever it was, the culture, the insensitivity of putting a nose on Bernstein that looked bigger than Bernstein's nose. He's not a man that was known for the size of his nose. It's not Cyrano de Bergerac. The publicity department should never have allowed those stills to go out, because it had already brought up the debate. It was so insensitive. So if that's the takeaway lesson, that if you are the director, producer, and leading actor of a production about a character, a Jewish character, make sure that you understand the history of Jewish noses, why the Jewish nose is so sensitive. I've done loads of research into why I was researching Shylock and understanding that anti-Semites were frightened of Jews because we could pass. If you took off your religious garb, you could pass as an ordinary member of the public. So when you saw them on stage, You had to have easily identifiable things that would make you go, Jew. One of those was putting on either a long pointed nose or a hook nose, which went back to medieval anti-Semitic images, which made them look like devils, and putting on a red wig, which was tied in with devils. If you don't understand that by allowing a photo that goes out showing a Jewish character with a much larger nose than the Jewish character the man had in real life, you're going to upset some people. So that would be my answer to that question.
I think I agree entirely. I saw the photo, the two of them side by side, and it was rather jarring. I've got a lovely question here from Johnny Weinberg in Manchester. So Johnny, like me, and like I think quite a lot of other people in this Zoom, I think you yourself have a Jewish youth movement background. And I know that you spoke at Johnny's told me, so I know because Johnny just told me, that you spoke at the 80th anniversary of the B'nai B'rith Youth Organisation, BBYO. How important was that youth movement experience in your development as a teenager and as a young Jewish person? And what do you think about the current state of what you're seeing about the younger generation of Jewish activists?
BBYO was a huge part of my growing up. It was, I didn't go to a Jewish school. There weren't many Jewish schools when I was growing up. And actually being Jewish, whilst I was brought up in a very traditional background, it felt important to be able to integrate into the secular society. But BBYO was full of lots of people like me. I found, really creative, really intelligent, some amazing people, some amazing community leaders, actors, writers, barristers, lawyers, television producers came out of my sports agents, came out of my
government ministers as well.
Oh my gosh, government ministers. Hi, Johnny, by the way. And it was a youth organization for the youth, run by the youth. So a lot of my creativity found an outlet. We had to create programs to engage our fellow community. We ran it for ourselves. So I think it taught a lot of leadership skills, a lot of identity skills, and a lot of creative programming skills. What I'm really excited about in recent years, and something that I've been really heartened, is how many young Jewish people have come up to me and said, we saw you stick your head above the parapet. We've heard you speak out. You've emboldened us to be brave. Because I think a lot of times when Jewish people, and particularly in my industry, have experienced that dog whistle anti-Semitism where you think, oh, that really hurt, but nobody else is picking up on it. Maybe I'm being the sensitive Jew. Things began to bother me, and I could see that nobody else was really speaking up. And what is it? Somebody said activists are born, not made. And I felt I couldn't, if nobody else was going to, I had to speak out. And what I like is that there are so many more younger people who are not frightened of sticking their head above the parapet and going, excuse me, that is anti-Semitic, or would you say that about any other minority, or can we have a conversation about that, or is that unconscious bias, or wow, the first thing that comes into your mind when I said I was Jewish is Rothschild, which is what happened to another friend of mine, or the number of Jewish actors I know or performers or creatives will go into a room and will hide their Star of David because they don't want to get automatically pinned up against a wall and asked about if they've been to Israel or what their opinion is on Israel, which in itself is, a very odd conflation of being Jewish. We're not all having to, we don't all work for the Israeli government, as we're told. So I think there's a lot of young, proud people out there who are really vocal about their identity, want to know about their history, and are very happy to stand up for it. And that makes me very happy.
I think the community as a whole is investing sufficiently in the next generation of activists. Do you have a sense of that?
I can't. I don't know. My remit. I don't know. I just think we're a very, we're the people of the book. We're a clever community. We're a community that understands words. And we're the joke is we're constantly told that we run the media. We'd be doing a lot better job if we actually did run the media, but we are a very clever community and we understand what the problems are. And to me, the main problem is about people understanding what is and isn't anti-Semitic. We're a very small community and a lot of people don't understand it. And that's why I'm using projects like The Merchant of Venice 1936, hopefully be able to open a debate of what is and isn't Jew hatred.
Had another question from this time from I think it's a combination of York and Manchester from Deputy Owen Powell. Owen's asking about culture and BDS and what do you think about this whole idea of people boycotting actors or productions that are associated with Israel, to do with Israel, boycotting Israeli artists, not wanting to get money from organizations that might be linked to Israel. Have you had any experience of it, and what are your thoughts about it?
I mean, look, this is getting into a political discussion, and one that I don't feel I'm in a position to talk about. But what I will say is that most people who work in the arts are very, are on the whole quite left-wing, are quite liberal, and are very progressive. And by boycotting Jewish artists and Jewish festivals and Jewish arts festivals and film festivals, you're very often boycotting the very voice and organizations that will give rise to a debate, and often giving rise to boycotting and shutting down productions that will help the people who are asking for BDS are saying that they want to support. The arts is a fantastic way. I think Helen Mirren said this. The arts is a fantastic way of opening debate. And in fact, I had a very interesting discussion with Prue Leith about this when I did Bake Off. We got very, very well. I've seen her subsequently, but she always said her mother was an actress at the Market Theatre in South Africa, and that by boycotting the arts coming over to South Africa, you stopped a channel and a lifeline to be able to use the arts to open debate, to show what was fair and what wasn't fair. So I don't think I do support BDS in the arts, because I think it's stopping the very people who need to be heard.
Yeah, I suspect there's nobody on this podcast who would disagree with that analysis. The lovely answer. I didn't mean the question to be political with a sort of a big P at all, and I think your answer was terrific. And we're drawing to the close. I'm hoping there are 100+ people on this podcast who are going to quickly go and book to see Merchant of Venice 36. What would you like them to take away from the production?
That they understand Shakespeare. We've had a lot of first-time Shakespeare people in who said, wow, it was, Manchester, we had almost a huge non-Jewish audience. And a lot of people who came in and said, it's my first Shakespeare and I loved it. Often people would come back. So number one, the realization that Shakespeare is for everybody and that you can understand every word. Number two, a forgotten bit of British history, which is the Battle of Cable Street, and the fascism against anti-Semitism in this country, that if we didn't have a king who abdicated, who was very friendly with Hitler and Mosley, this country could have been a far less tolerant country. But also seeing our Bubba, our great-grandmothers, our strong female matriarchs on that stage, taking on the anti-Semitism of the 30s and feeling proud of who we are, those female matriarchs that we often forget about, that aren't written in the history books, but who stood there on the front line of Battle of Cable Street and put up as good a fight as the men.
Tracy-Ann, it's been absolutely brilliant talking with you this evening. I know you're right in the middle of rehearsals, and so I think one does say break a leg still. I guess that's part of it, but I hope everything goes just superbly, and I'm personally very much looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to remind people, it's going all around the country, and please go on the websites, but we're going to the Royal Shakespeare Company, York, Malvern, Chichester, we've announced today, Wilton's Music Hall on Cable Street, where everybody mobilised from on the day. We're going to High Wycombe, to the Swan, Bromley, Cardiff. Please come and see it. Please come and support us. It's so important that plays like this are seen to be supported as well, because then they'll put on more Jewish content plays.
So I'll make sure when we send out this recording, we'll make sure we put all the links. People can see very easily what to do. And this podcast is one of a series. We run them every few weeks, and people should look out for more podcasts in the future where we bring fascinating and brilliant people to talk about issues of concern to the Jewish community. So thank you, Tracy-Ann, very much. Thank you to the production team behind this, Daniel Sugarman and Leo and everyone who's involved, and Saul Radivan. And thank you all very much. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you again soon. Good night.
Bye.